If you want to know why our public agents and why our young families or prospective young families are moving out, why our lower rung workers are moving out of the coastal markets, it's because of housing. When you ask CEOs and presidents of companies, as we have in surveys, basically the survey research version of what keeps you up at night, the answer 100% always is our inability to attract new employees or retain the employees that we have. So ultimately, we come to an economic nexus where these housing issues aren't just housing issues. We're all housing experts around the table here. These really are economic issues.
Absolutely.
And they go to the basis of sustaining our economies in California particularly.
And two quick points on that. First, to the political question, do elected leaders, policymakers know the cost difference? They find out when it comes to financing affordable housing. That's deed-restricted housing available only to low-income families or sometimes very low or special needs populations. And these are all publicly financed. And that public financing is transparent. And we've now hit and surpassed $1.2 million in cost per apartment.
This is like a one-bedroom apartment?
These are one bedroom up
in
to
a
5/1
kind of
in a 5/1 context.
I mean,
and so everybody's, we can't do this. What is this? And you poke at it and you poke at it and you find exactly the same economics. Housing here is a Christmas tree for everyone to hang their favorite ornaments on. And that's true for affordable housing.
So it's $1 million a unit.
Per apartment.
Per apartment. So you think about that, right?
Yeah, it's north of 700,000 or 800,000 in San Diego at least. It's hitting these numbers. I guess these are mostly Bay Area numbers.
San Diego, Santa Monica, San Francisco. But
the point is a ridiculous number.
It is ridiculous. You think about how ridiculous that is. Just a quick context.
Yeah. So
if it's $1 million, forget about financing costs, which is like huge on top of it. But let's say there were no financing costs. And you had $50,000 a year in rent coming in, $4,000 a month, which is already high for most people.
Which is not what these units are.
It would take you 20 years just to break even on that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's crazy, right? No sane financial source or entrepreneur would build a project
except
like
that the public sources of financing do. You get the tax credit and so forth.
Free money.
You know who my clients who are prospering are? The ones that are in the space of providing this kind of housing, this kind of public housing, tax credit below market rate housing. My clients who are in the strictly pure private sector, having to sort of deal with this reservation of 10 or 20% below rate housing, they're the ones that are on the sidelines right now.
Yep.
And it makes no sense at all because we can't provide enough housing. Ultimately, it's a model that's broken, but there's a whole ecosystem associated with providing this kind of housing in California.
Well, and you would think that somehow, just take Southern California as an example. Somehow, maybe it would be cheaper to build in San Bernardino or in Riverside County. The drop in housing permits, in building permits, was higher in those two counties than it was in LA, Orange, and San Diego counties last year.
People are tapped out, Marshall.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, we just don't have enough people that have the incomes available or what's left of shredded credit ratings available to manage California anymore. Yeah. And it's just brutal. And the people we're being brutal to are the ones my party, Democratic Party, purport to want to protect. And it's just a brutal collision. I use the example is, what if instead of climate change, we were completely obsessed with teenage misbehavior? Just as a happenstance.
Talk about a hopeless cause.
Yeah, exactly. And so
I have a teenager, so educate me.
He has a couple of them, actually.
The answer is, to have a child, you need a bedroom and a bathroom for each child. That's just the way it is. That is what we're going to do to avoid teenage misbehavior. Well, someone would say, what are you talking about? That's ridiculous. And we would all have stories of shared bathrooms and fights and whatever. And that's a good thing. You kind of grow up a little bit. But we've just handed housing to a group of special interests that don't care, on the one hand, Or on the other hand, our Democratic Socialists of America believe that there should be a complete redistribution away from current wealth distribution and frankly away from capitalism. And once that happens, this will all work out just fine.
Yeah, and where is the economic incentive to build anything, even under democratic socialism? It's not there.
Well, it's certainly not there for people alive today.
Right, right, exactly. Well, we do have AI coming in, which is good, so that we can, potentially just have the robots build everything.
I'll take the first one. Maybe you can take the second on whether the policymakers really understand. As to the first one, there are laws that we cannot overcome. If no matter what we all decide through our elected representatives at the local state level, if we can still tolerate anyone who's unhappy for any reason can sue even anonymously, we're toast. Because as long as that leverage point exists, and that's the California Environmental Quality Act, then this stays a Christmas tree.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because you live in fear and often futile hope that, if I just put this one more Christmas tree ornament on and put this cost on, maybe the market will be stronger and maybe these people won't sue.
Is that fixable?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Well, since the lawyers
the local or state level is fixable.
Well, you're the lawyer at the table since your lobby controls the state legislature.
It sounds like the constant period of endless challenges to environmental reviews has got to stop.
It's just got to stop.
Mm-hmm.
We have to have a one and done structure.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to sue once, fine.
Mm-hmm.
But then we got to build for the next 20 years. The other part of this, which I just don't want to walk away from, is at the federal, state, and local levels, we seem to have lost institutionally a notion of hierarchy. So we had one of the testimony presentations in the housing hearing was from a LA affordable housing developer using only private financing, thinking there's enough Section 8 vouchers to actually make the project pencil, right? Using prefab housing units in a stacked apartment design, 80% done. An inspector comes by from the city and says, you need a third stairwell.
Yeah.
And there's no governor in place to say to that inspector, no. It just is bollocksed up at the department dysfunctional level. Same thing with the state.
And that person had the purview to be able to do that.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And shouldn't have, but does, because we don't have an ethic of holding people. Same thing at the state, the Department of State. Fish and Wildlife, which is supposed to, among other things, protect endangered species. There's one person in the state who now is a, quote, queen bee. Mm-hmm. We surprisingly listed a bee for the first time in history through a judicial decision, not through a legislative act, a bee as a candidate species for protection, but it's entitled to full protection under our law. And this one person has the entire state by the throat as she thinks about, well, I don't know. And these bees don't live in the same hive every year. They move. And how rare are they anyway? So we have no alignment between that agency, Department of Fish and Wildlife, and the state's supposed devotion to housing. We need a little bit more return to governance order. Mm-hmm. And without that, we can write as many laws and get rid of as many lawsuits, but we're still be dysfunctional. Yes, that's right.
So CEQA clearly is an issue. And that's something we complain about. My developer clients complain about all the time. We need all the things that Jennifer suggested and more. The other big issue is insurance. Yeah. Liability insurance. We're not building condominiums, for sale houses. All we're building, this is part of the disconnect of what we're building, not just in numbers, but in type. In San Diego, and this applies to most of the other coastal markets, we're building mostly apartments to one segment of the housing market, which has basically been satisfied at this point. And to the detriment of people that need and want to purchase a home. My first home when I was a young man was a condominium, and that allowed me to enter the market and move up into ultimately the bigger and more expensive homes later. It's the source of most people's wealth, and you have to start out with condos. And we're not building any condos at all, and the reason for that is because they're not able to be underwritten. So part of it's financial, but the big part is relative to apartments. And at least that's been the case over the last 10 years. And the big part is just construction liability issues associated with basically HOAs and others that have a 10-year run to sue their builders and their architects and their contractors, to the point where no one wants to participate in the delivery of this kind of housing. So that's a huge issue in my industry right now.
So lack of alignment.
And that can be cured by the state.
Well, it sounds like everything here can be cured.
Everything can at some level, and then you have to manage people.
So we need the alignment commission. Instead of the government efficiency, whatever the Doge is that is being done, we actually need a government alignment initiative.
And we know that this could work. You know, I'm now affiliated with the University of Texas, and so I spent quite a bit of time there, and will be there, going there. Jennifer's also participating in some of the things we're doing in Texas. Austin, about the hottest market in the country the last decade. Prices are going down because they overbuilt. That's the way it's supposed to work.
Right. The
like
market
you
mechanism.
build too much and then it gets cheaper. It's like when I've almost every time I bought a house, it's because the guy who owned the house spent too much money on something, and therefore he had to sell. But in Texas, they build the housing that they need and some. And that gives you, but in California, there doesn't seem to be any of that.
Well, and I guess my as we kind of wrap up here, is that a model for us in terms of government alignment? Does government in places like Texas align itself from state down to local, or is it just luck?
I think it's less government, period. State and local is the first answer. The second answer, though, is I think you could go some distance before finding operational cultures that are more different. In California, there's a huge section of Californians who identify as environmentalists. I'm one of them. One of the reasons we like it here is because it's a beautiful environment. Right. But there is a massive subset of the environmental community that wants to degrow, believes California is over its holding capacity. And as long as this housing market continues in its catastrophic form, they're getting their wish. People are leaving.
The best
Texas, that would be crazy. Yeah, no one in Texas would say we're not going to grow to accommodate people's needs.
Plus, there are also people moving there in large numbers, particularly young people.
Basically, zoning is something that's been around for 100 years based on the philosophy of separation of uses. And everything we've been talking about around this table is integration of uses, the village concept and everything you've been talking about, Jennifer. So we really need to revisit sort of our philosophical concept of how we govern the regulation of housing. At the very least, go to form-based zoning, but eliminate the idea that you have to have zoning codes and so forth in place. It would save a lot of time and effort, compress bureaucracies too.
But by the way, just because I do spend a lot of time in Texas, the city of Houston has what they call covenants. So, in other words,
it's effectively zoning.
They have ways of regulating.
Right. So what you do is, but it's the best of both worlds. There's lots of opportunities to build denser housing, do all sorts of, interesting things with development, and at the same time protect your single family neighborhoods. Because what worries me, particularly here in California, is we're just wiping out our middle class, and that, the middle class will end up being a bunch of us ultra-cockers.
You can't ignore the national trend, right? The national trend is toward populism, basically, right? Toward, in the literal sense of that word, let's make life focused around the middle class. Right. Let's make life focused around everybody.
Well, there is a movement that I have some hope in that's come up now, mostly left, some right, pretty strong kind of libertarian undercurrent, but still, believers in government and whatnot, mostly 30s and 40s age range, and they call themselves the Abundance Network. And the idea is it's crazy to think we can't add a mile to a freeway. It's crazy to think that we can't improve our carbon footprint. It's crazy to think that we've stopped innovating. That's all it's boomer craziness. And it's not for nothing. We all may remember, that kind of me generation, that's us. And we've created this amber that we're all stuck in right now. And the kids are coming up and they're not such kids. They just have kids now. They're paying attention because they have kids. And they're like, this is ridiculous. Who set this up? There's a law professor who calls it procedural fetishism. The idea that you can sue over anything, anytime. Came out of Ralph Nader's kind of consumer protection thing because Nader was a lawyer from Yale. Why not sue? That's the right answer to everything. There is hope, but it's going to come at a cost, a generational war.
Well,
cost,
and it wasn't as though the generational change that we were associated with as boomers didn't come at a cost.
Exactly right.
It's seen to recall a great deal of disruption in the 1960s and 70s. But of course, my brain as a boomer is starting to fade. So maybe it isn't true.
Well,
it might have been a little cloudy at the time as well.
That's true. That is true.
Well, for the first time, the sons and daughters and grandchildren of us are facing a future that isn't as prosperous as our present as our future was when we were that age. To me, that's a catalyst for change.
Yeah, but I think the point that you're making is our parents didn't make it prosperous, didn't create prosperity for us. We created it. We looked at this what was an ossified world coming out of World War II and said, hey, we want to do things our way. I look at my kids, they want to do things their way. They have a different set of tools. They have social media, AI, a gazillion different levers to pull than what we had. But hopefully they'll be able to come up with some creative, innovative solutions to win.
So I want to run this hypothesis by you. So when we were coming up, I was given in 5th grade their choice between being a secretary, a nurse, a teacher, or a mother. Catholic school, 5th grade. We blew that up. We totally blew it up. But what we did when we weren't blowing up social constructs was make it impossible to build. That our parents didn't do to us. They never said, don't build. That's the evil from my perspective that we are visiting on the next generation. And we need to own.
Well, but by your own argument, it is not impossible to change that.
Of course it isn't.
It's easy enough. It's easy. So all we need is the will. We need our students who, may not be entirely tuned into this to kind of become aware of it, right? And understand what the issues are.
And stop being depressed that it's all hopeless
that
because
part of
the world is going to end.
Yeah. Hopefully there'll be something beyond the feudal future. And speaking of the feudal future, it's been wonderful having you both. This has just been a tremendously stimulating conversation.
And this is a topic will come up again and again, and not just in California, but many parts of the country. And by the way, in the rest of the world. I mean, you know, I do a lot of work in the UK, and their situation, I would say, is in many ways worse. And so, you know, I think this is an issue we'll revisit for sure.
And it's interesting, we haven't touched on immigration, homeless, any of those other big issues that are all tied into this as well.
We'll get to them.
This is the only issue.
Well, thanks again.
Thank you again for being part of the Feudal Future podcast, and we hope to have you back soon.
Thank you.
Thanks.
The Feudal Future.